Hey everybody, welcome back. It has been, I feel like it's been way longer than it should have been, but now that finals are over, I finally have a little bit of time in between semesters to commit to doing some video footage, which will be really great, or I should say an episode. I have some time to do an episode or two. And yeah, now that I come to think of it, I haven't even done one even before that because I was doing my second part to my video interview with Maven and Jean on Latter Daily Digest. So again, shout out to them. They're amazing and their channel's amazing. And they're just really, really nice people. So it was really great to get to have that experience with them. And last time I remember leaving off where I had talked about a text message exchange that I had had over conference weekend with a relative. And of course, I love that person. So I would like to reiterate that that person is a good person, and just take what relatives and loved ones and people in the church say with a grain of salt sometimes, because a lot of the times they're just trying to get you to come back so that they can feel safe and secure about you being in their lives forever. So with that said, I was kind of going through some of my videos and I was trying to figure out what it was that I needed to get back into talking about this week. And I remember doing my video part one of what was keeping me in the church. So the first part was really more to do with temple work and temple ordinances and the sealing power, and how I had continued to wear my garments and all that stuff just out of my own fear that if somehow that part were true, I would somehow be losing all the benefits and blessings of those things if I were to stop wearing my garments or stop going to the temple. But I think I go through that pretty well in that video. So if you haven't watched it, you can go back and watch that one. But the other thing, it was another major topic that I feel was really keeping me in, that I had to kind of go through and figure out how it all made sense with the new information that I had come across studying the history of the church and actually breaking everything down to the actual truth and what I was actually seeing the church as for what it is, as history has shown. So that second topic was mainly the gift of the Holy Ghost and spiritual witnesses. So I do want to create a bit of a distinguishment between those two things, both for members and myself alike, just because I think a lot of people in the church sometimes maybe view it all as one encompassing thing. So any little impression that they think that they're getting, or in my experience, I'll speak for myself, little impressions I thought I was getting in the past, I really viewed as just the gift of the Holy Ghost. But I think what really kind of helped me come around was realizing that there is a difference. And I know that there are different talks and other things within the church given by leaders and so forth that kind of also talk about possible differences and things. I don't know specifically if it's to that distinguishment between spiritual witness versus the gift of the Holy Ghost. It's been a little while, but that was something that I started thinking really hard about because of some of my personal experiences. There was a time where I remember talking to a friend and kind of going through some of my faith crisis journey with her and saying, but I could never leave the church because I've had too many spiritual experiences happen in my life that there's just no way that could make the church untrue. But what I eventually came to realize was that any of these experiences were not necessarily because I was a member of the church. And as I started sitting and thinking about that, I also started considering how everything really relates back to the claims of Joseph Smith and the priesthood and the revelation that he claimed to receive pertaining to that. And since things like temple ordinances and sealing power and the gift of the Holy Ghost are all bestowed according to his, the way that he set things up, and also based on, I'm certain, his understanding of the New Testament. That is all supposed to be based on priesthood power given to men as they are worthy to have it. And so when I started really breaking that down, it started to make less and less sense that the Mormon Church has a claim on this gift of the Holy Ghost. So I had to really sit with that for a while. And I remember actually having a conversation with a friend of mine, because it was really interesting. What really sparked this thought in me was I was actually this was last summer, I was taking a course for health coaching online and going through all these different speeches and lectures that were given by different professionals, from like doctors to nurses to other people in that space who aren't specifically certified as doctors and so forth, but that still work doing other things, like working in like spiritual work. And there was one person in particular, and I can't remember her name, I'd have to get back on and look, but she had been talking about her experience where she was getting ready to become a dentist. She was in school for that, and somebody she had met had shown her how to basically like meditate and get into like this state of mind where you would be able to experience like getting these impressions or like these feelings, and it was based on, like getting in touch with people on the other side and things like that. And she wasn't a medium or anything, but it was something kind of very near that as far as a profession goes. And she was really intrigued by that. And she started talking about these things and talking about how you need to get into a quiet space and you need to quiet your mind, and basically talking about a lot of the things that we've been taught to do to get in touch with the Holy Ghost in the church. And I thought that was so interesting that so many of those things that she had talked about paralleled with people's experiences in the church, and it just got those wheels turning for me. And so I remember talking to a friend about it, because I had been talking to her about a lot of the things that I was learning in my health coaching course. And I was like, hey, this is kind of interesting, but it made me, I kind of gave her the rundown of what, I just had been talking about with this woman's experience. And I said, it's kind of led me into this idea of, how is what we have, like it's led me to the question of how is what we have as members of the church, how is that different from what other people outside the church are experiencing? Like, this is supposed to be God's one and only true church. We're supposed to have his power. It's special just for us. And we get this gift of the Holy Ghost that's special, that only can come through the priesthood. How is it different from what other people are experiencing then? And how are they getting into it? And I remember having like a little bit of like the conversation, going in the direction of like, oh, well, the adversary also has counterfeits. And I was like, yeah, but it doesn't seem like anything that happened with her and with some of these other people that I had also reflected on. It didn't seem like anything that had happened was actually bad. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me that they were getting some like evil witness helping them. So, and what I mean by that is that I've also, both in and out of the church, like I've heard stories from different people who've clearly had some level of like spiritual or divine guidance happening for them. And I think that's also where that distinguishment comes in for me, is that I think there's a difference between having like actual like divine intervention and divine guidance versus a spiritual witness, which I think can oftentimes be mistaken for our own personal feelings that we can manifest ourselves. So there were a few things that had come to mind while I was thinking about this woman's experience in my course that she had shared versus experiences that I'd heard from members in the church, and then also people who had either left or, in the case of a couple of my family members, my mom who had left, who had had an experience of like having her prayer answered and being guided to find us as kids when we were living with my dad. And I was about 17, my brother was about 12, and she had heard through the grapevine that we had moved to a little town called Libby, Montana, but she didn't know our address, she didn't know exactly where we were, and I know that I said it's a small town, but still, there were enough places around that it wouldn't have been easy for her to find us very quickly. But she said that before she left, because she had decided, I need to figure out where my children are, specifically, I need to know where they are living. And she decided that she was going to take some time off of work, and she was hitting the dusty trail and coming to find us. And she lived in Washington, on the West Coast. And so she drove all the way over, and she said before she left, she had said a prayer and asked God to help her find us. And lo and behold, the funny thing is that my dad, he had a friend that they were, basically decided that they would pair together and just cut costs by, we'd all live together. And he had taken our van out to run some errands, and then he decided to stop at this gas station. Well, my mom had actually stopped at that gas station to get gas. I think it was like the first one in town or something. And he decided to stop there, not knowing that was my mom's car. And she saw him and recognized him and the van, and was just immediately grateful, and felt that her prayers were answered. And at the time when she told us that, I didn't believe her. I thought she had to have been lying or making some of it up, but it also didn't make sense that she was able to find us, because as soon as my dad's friend had come back with the van, like, she was following right behind him, and we were like, how did she figure that out? And she was trying to tell us, like, I know that God answered my prayers. Some people may see that as a coincidence. I don't. I absolutely see that as divine intervention. But there are stories like that. And then also another one that had come to mind as I was going through this process of trying to sort through, what is true and what wasn't. I had an aunt back when I was in my early 20s. My mom had gotten remarried, and at their wedding, I was catching up with my aunt, and she was just telling me about, how life was going. She was part of this church. I can't remember the name of it, but it sounded like a really great church. And it was one that I think it's not very well known. It's a pretty small church, and it might have been very specific to like the area that she lived in, but it was a Christian church, and she said she was just loving it. She went every Sunday, and it just had brightened her life. And she was telling me about this experience that she had as an employee at Boeing. She went to work one morning, and she got this distinct impression that she needed to reach out to this coworker of hers that worked in a different part of the building. And she was like, from what it sounded like, they weren't super close friends or anything. She didn't know this person crazy well. But they were work friends, and she said she just got into work, and she said it was a weird thing, because she just felt immediately when she got into her office that she needed to email this person and check on them and see if they were okay. And she was like, I don't know why I felt like I needed to do that, but she was like, I opened my computer, and before I even got to work, I emailed this person. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know if they had anything going on. I just felt I needed to do it. And so she did, and the person replied pretty soon after saying, hey, yeah, like, these are the things that have been going on. And from what I can remember, I think this person had been going through something pretty significant. I think it was like health issues and possibly like a divorce to couple with that. And just something pretty significant in life that can put a person into a bad state of mind. And so this person had said to her, like, who told you? Like, how'd you find out? And she said, I didn't know. She said, I just felt like I was supposed to reach out to you. And I feel like those are those kinds of experiences that you can't really explain away as just coincidence. And I've also heard these kinds of stories with members in the church too. And that was where I really had to come to decide, what then makes us different. So going back to my conversation with my friend, where I was talking to her about my health coaching course, and the very, very aligned just concepts going along with trying to get into the tune with the Spirit, that and she didn't call it the Spirit. She was saying, this is how you get in tune with, like, you know, these impressions and hearing from the other side, or whatever it was. And I thought, well, this just aligns like so much with the things that we've learned. And so I was telling my friend about this, and I said, so based on all of this, you know, I guess I don't understand anymore what sets members of the church apart with the gift of the Holy Ghost and that constant companionship of the Holy Ghost. Like, I don't get what sets us apart from everyone else. And she was like, oh, well, we have the constant companionship of the Holy Ghost. And I was thinking, well, I kind of don't even remember, I don't remember even being told that other people had access to the Holy Ghost at all. I remember being told, you know, like, hey, people outside the church, like, they can get a spiritual witness, but it's not the gift of the Holy Ghost, and that can only come from like hearing about like God's one and only true gospel and church. And I was like, I don't remember hearing ever or reading ever within church doctrine that people still have access to the Holy Ghost, because that, like, I thought that had to be bestowed upon them. And she's like, yeah, but ours is constant companionship. And I was like, yeah, but how does that make any sense? I was like, because it's not like we are constantly having the Holy Ghost telling us things. And we've even been given, there have been talks given by different leaders in the church saying that you shouldn't even expect that. I remember, I don't even remember who it was by. Somebody leave me a comment if you know who this was. But I do remember a specific talk that one of the brethren gave, you know, in like the Quorum of the 12, where they said that they had been talking about a young man, like in a family, who, as the husband, before they would even go out grocery shopping, they would pray about like even what brands to buy, and like all these, like every single little thing that was super arbitrary and insignificant. And they basically said in the talk, like, don't expect that this is how the Holy Ghost operates or works. The funny thing that I find about that is that clearly that husband, that man, did think that he was being guided by the Spirit, which goes to kind of prove my point, which is, when do people, you know, actually feel the Spirit versus when they think they're just feeling the Spirit, which, you know, led me right back to the beginning. And so I was having this conversation with her, and she really didn't have much of an answer for me. And I was like, I just don't see how what we have is different from what other people's experiences are then. And yeah, she really didn't have an answer, and I didn't have an answer. And then I started getting to this point where I was like, okay, I have to figure this out. So when I really broke it all down, I realized that yes, like, I personally believe, and based on what I know of other people's experiences, that this kind of divine intervention absolutely can happen for people. But I didn't see that it was happening at a higher or more frequent rate with people in the church, just of my own observation and what I know. That's not like I did some, you know, empirical study, but based on what I was seeing, there wasn't a difference, and even based on my own experience. And the more that I've also learned about, you know, the human body and about our minds and how amazing, you know, our bodies work and how they function, I also learned that the placebo effect, and I relate this back to this just because I think this proves my point further, but the placebo effect, when somebody takes a placebo, it's not just that they feel better just because they believe they feel better, but because they believe that they've taken something that will help them. Your mind will literally create, you know, the hormones or like neurochemicals or whatever it is that your body needs to actually aid in recovery and feeling better. So your mind will literally do that for you. So I really believe that there are a lot of cases where people in the church who feel like they are feeling that Spirit. And I mean, more specifically in situations where somebody is praying about, what major they should choose for school, and they feel drawn to a certain major. And I'm not saying that you can't get a spiritual witness of that. I'm just saying I feel like those kinds of instances are a lot more easily confused with your own feelings. And in a way, it almost makes me a little bit sad to think that because this is the belief that is in place, that members believe, it's almost like they put their own confidence and decision-making ability outside of themselves, when really a lot of those decisions probably are coming from within, but they don't think it is. They view it as an outside source telling them that. And I've heard these stories from people before too, like I had another friend who was like, hey, yeah, I was really stressed about like this, degree that I had started, and I was praying about it. And right after I said my prayer and read my scriptures, like the Spirit witnessed to me like, hey, you are strong and you're a smart person and you're going to do so well at this. And I was thinking, well, that's really wonderful. But the problem that I take with that is that there's no way for you to prove that that came from the Spirit, or if that was just like you trying to comfort yourself, believing that it was the Spirit. And I personally will admit that I think that I've had several of those experiences. But I can honestly also say that I've had experiences similar to like my mother or my aunt, where I can't really explain the coincidences that happened because I didn't plan them, and it wasn't something I could manifest myself. So those kinds of experiences, I don't have an explanation for. And I know some people might still write them off as coincidences, or you may not believe that it was anything but coincidence or something else. And that's fine too. I personally still believe in God. I believe in Jesus Christ. So in my mind, I think that those spiritual guidances are available to everyone. I just don't think that the church has a claim on those. And that was kind of the other part of my deconstruction with figuring out, whether or not the gift of the Holy Ghost was something that I needed to be concerned about and remain a member over. Because when I started getting back to the history, everything, I think, as I mentioned before, it relates really back to that priesthood, and based on Joseph Smith's revelations from Jesus, even by his own revelations that he created, that is entirely based on your worthiness as a male member to be able to even hold the priesthood. And from what I could determine from the veracity of his character, he absolutely did not fall into the category of worthy male member holding the priesthood. So it didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And going even back further to that, and I realize this might be a bit tangential, but it really made me think a lot about the behavioral patterns of his character. So even before he had started the church, there were rumors of his infidelity or his inclination to flirt with young girls, teenage girls. Some of those really, they aren't proven. Historians even who, both in and out of the church who have studied that even both admit, there's not enough to go on to prove those. But personally, I find it interesting just based on what we do know about what happened later in the church with his infidelity, because I don't consider plurality of wives. I don't perceive that as being fidelity in any way, just because they were married, which at the time, again, taking into account the details, it was illegal. So even these subsequent wives were really not married to any of these men. They essentially were in a state of concubinage. So it really didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I was, and then there's the whole, fun little instance of the Fanny Alger episode with Joseph Smith. That I feel like is a huge wrench that was thrown into the history that I have not heard a good explanation from apologists over that. And that was before he'd ever received a revelation about plural marriage. And he had already been, after Fanny Alger, or Alger, however you say her name, he had been married to several women, like at least a couple dozen before he was even sealed to Emma, and didn't write down a revelation until his brother Hiram asked him to dictate something so that he could try to convince Emma of this. So he was already doing all these things behind her back. A lot of these other women didn't know either that they were married to the same man. Of course, they knew that Emma was Joseph Smith's wife, but there were, even from what I understand too, there were even sisters who didn't know that they were both secretly married. So the reason I bring this up is because a lot of this really does, in my mind, go back to those behaviors and whether or not that determines that you are worthy based on the actual dictated revelation that Joseph Smith claimed to have gotten about the power of the priesthood and about God's expectations of any man who holds it. So to me, that was a really big deal. And I ultimately came to that conclusion that there's no way that he was worthy of that. There's no way that he was able to stake a claim on that. I know that the concept of the priesthood, the laying on of hands to give and receive the gift of the Holy Ghost, they aren't unique to Mormonism. Joseph Smith was very well versed in the Bible. That much is very clear. And he was not shy about taking his ideas from already created works that were already out there, and that includes the Bible. Excuse me. So ultimately, I kind of had to sit back and realize that these experiences that I had heard in the past when I was super committed, and I just couldn't handle really thinking about them much as like a teenager or a young adult, I had to circle back to those and didn't realize that I had put them on my shelf or that I had even had a shelf. But it was something that resurfaced in my mind as I was considering why this topic was so important to me and why I was holding on to it. And basically, I've come to my own conclusion that as somebody who does believe in God, I also believe that we have loved ones on the other side that I think also can be instruments in God's hands to guide us and help us. And I just don't see why that wouldn't be a possibility. That is just my personal feeling. I don't know if that's for sure true, but that is just how I feel about it. And I absolutely think that you can get spiritual witnesses. I do think that you can have spiritual experiences that aren't just coincidence. But I don't think that the Mormon Church has claim on that. Like they claim a lot of other things because they also claim that they are God's one and only true church, even though maybe not publicly so boldly stated by them. But anyway, so that was really kind of my experience with having to figure out where I sat on that situation and just feeling like I kept coming up short, and I was asking other people, trying to kind of like with the temple, take every last measure I could to try to hold on to the church because I thought that I was doing the right thing. I thought I was doing my due diligence, and I was trying to give it everything I could, and ultimately it just came crumbling down because none of it made any sense. So with that being said, ultimately those were the conclusions that I came to. I know that it can be different for everybody, and I don't know if this is a topic that is helpful. I hope it is for some people. I don't know if this is a topic that anybody else struggled with in their deconstruction. Leave me comments. Let me know what you guys were really stuck on. I feel like it's so different for everybody, and especially with, different interviews that I've heard from different people on the different channels within this space. I feel like we typically tend to lean into the things that more specifically directly affect us. And I think that's just human nature. For me, obviously, because I'm a woman, the whole polygamy thing and the priesthood and leadership roles and how that has affected my perception of myself throughout my life growing up, and how I felt as a woman member of the church, that was very specific to me. And it's not that the other issues weren't important to me. I absolutely felt pretty upset learning about the priesthood ban. I also came to, and this has been more of a recent conclusion, but it also upsets me now to think about just the LGBTQ community who feel unwelcomed or often judged or turned away within the church. So things like that, you know, that I know are very specific to each of our situations, and I hope to be able to honor everybody's different situation here. But I know that I've mostly at this point on this channel have shared a lot about my own, and I want to be able to bring more of your guys' perspectives into future videos. So please leave me comments about what it is that you would like to have more of a discussion about, or think more about, because I really appreciate you guys and this, you know, community that we have going on. And I want to make sure that I'm accommodating you guys. And I know that some of you have talked to, you know, have commented on wanting to know about like my husband's and my dynamics. That might be a video that I end up doing on my own. My husband is really not into being in front of the camera. So maybe that's something that I'll kind of talk about on my own, and go into more detail with, and also how that kind of relates to my own spiritual divine intervention experiences, because I feel like the most major one that I ever had was how I met my husband. So, and I do feel like, going back to the topic of today, that really was a very special circumstance that I don't have an explanation for every little thing that happened with us. So but yeah, let me know what you guys want to talk more about, what you want to see here. I would love to be able to make this more of a collaborative channel, I guess, between all of us. So even though I don't have everybody here to talk to, and maybe we can also, you know, communicate by way of, you know, me being able to do videos where I am reading your guys' stories and comments and things like that. So let me know what you guys think is important. I know that there are a lot of other channels that do such an excellent job of a lot of the history and stuff that I haven't gone as in depth with, and I haven't really left any actual links or resources to any of the actual sources. But basically, I'm just kind of explaining my process based on what I have learned. So leave me comments. I love to hear back from you guys, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful Sunday, whatever that looks like for you. So I'll see you guys next week. Bye.